Hello, I'm International Master Andrew Martin, and welcome to this 10 Easy Ways to Improve series. Whatever your level, you're going to find tips here that are going to make you a much stronger chess player. I remember when I was first starting out in chess as a kid, I just learned the basic moves and a few simple strategical ideas. Then I wanted to go further. But unfortunately, my father who taught me wasn't a really strong player. So I had to gain my information from reading books and by simply playing the game. I used to play with my friends at school, and this helped me to get better. But what I really could have done with was help from a coach to tell me what best to focus on. There's an enormous range of things you can do in chess and look at. Chess is a almost unfathomable sea of possibilities. So, it would have helped me just to be able to focus on the basics and the most important things I needed to know to reach the next level. And that really is the purpose of this series of DVDs. I'm going to use my 3 decades of coaching experience to help you to get better, to teach you what to focus on to get to the next level in chess. And this is the first of 3 DVDs concentrating on improvers. These are people who have, like me at that time, just learned the rules and know a few simple ideas about chess. Now we want to know what we're doing wrong, what we need to focus on, how to improve. Well, I've chosen 10 concepts at each level, which I think if you concentrate on, you will certainly achieve better results as a player. You'll feel your enjoyment of the game increasing, you'll get better. And the first of these concepts is concentration. Now, concentration is something which improvers often find difficult to achieve. Life is very rich, and the older you get, the more pressure you have. But even as a kid, you tend to think about lots of things, even during a game of chess. What you should try and do is focus on the game and the game alone when you're playing it. Set aside everything else from your mind and concentrate on chess. If you do that, your results will immediately start to improve. Now, the whole point of concentration is to avoid mistakes. Improvers' games tend to feature a lot of big mistakes, and that's what we're trying to cut out. If you cut out the big mistakes, you'll cut out a lot of embarrassing losses. Now, I've chosen a game from one of my students who actually lives in Denmark to illustrate what can happen when you lose concentration during the game. This game was played in September 2010. Playing white is a Danish player called Frank Jerning Pettersen, playing black a fellow called Uffe Kallenbach. These two players I would classify in the improvers category. Well, white kicked off with 1d4. Now, for most improvers, the move e4 is probably better to play. But d4 is a very safe move. As you can see, the pawn is protected by the queen, and this gives white's game a rock-like quality. Kids, young players, really should learn how to attack. We're going to come on to that a little bit later on this particular DVD. But older players tend to like the queen's pawn. They like the idea that they're not going to be thrashed in the opening. When you start to study opening theory, you'll see books, very thick books on the shelves containing lots of moves. Well, in between those moves, there are lots of nasty traps and tricks to negotiate. And you'll find the higher you get up the chess ladder that players will try and set these traps against you. They're nothing to worry about, but as I say, older players perhaps like the thought that they're not going to be trapped in the opening, thus they tend to play d4, and black plays knight f6. As I've shown, the main motivation behind knight f6 is to stop white from playing e4. If white was allowed to play e4, he gets an ideal centre. And anybody at any level must fight for the centre in the opening. This is a key concept. Alright, well, white now plays bishop to g5. This is an opening called the Trompowsky. It's named after a Brazilian grandmaster, and it's motivated by the simple thought that white is going to play bishop takes f6 and double black's pawns. Black doesn't seem worried by this. In fact, he allows white to execute his threat. So white gaily goes on with doubling the pawns, and now he plays a very harmonious move, e3. Well, this is a modest looking move, but it's got 2 points to it. The first point is that white solidly protects the pawn on d4. Not that it needs protection, but black might be thinking of a strike on that pawn. As I've said, it's important in chess to fight for the centre. So if black were to play a move like c5, which puts pressure on the pawn at d4, white has that pawn solidly protected. Going back to the move e3, white also lets the bishop on f1 out and the queen on d1. So 2 good things with 1 move. Okay, black doesn't see any chink in white's position, so he plays bishop d6. So far, so good. And both sides, over the next few moves, go through with the opening principle of developing the pieces. White brings both his knights out, black gets his king to safety, and develops his bishop to e6. Bishop comes to d3, knight comes to d7, and now white plays pawn up to b3. And the point of this move is to be able to play c4 on the next turn. Despite the fact we're 9 moves into the game, both players are fighting for the centre. So what white would like black very much to do is to take that pawn on c4. Then white recaptures with the pawn, and he has 2 pawns in the centre. Pawns in the centre take away squares from the enemy pieces. So as you can see, black can't put any pieces on the key central squares c5, d5 and e5. Naturally, black doesn't like that, and he plays his pawn up to c6, holding the centre. Don't give up the centre in chess unless you have to. White castled. Black plays knight f6. White pushes on the queen side and plays b4. So white has obviously decided on the plan of advancing his queenside pawns. It's a little bit slow, but it's a decent thing to do. And now black puts his knight in on e4. Well, we call that an outpost. Black has put his knight on a very strong outpost in the middle of white's position. And it's my impression here that white starts to lose a bit of concentration. He doesn't like the thought of that piece in the middle of his position. And he doesn't like the idea of taking it either. So he's becoming a little bit worried about that piece. And he starts to play rather weakly as a result. Black, meanwhile, seems very focused. He is thinking about a direct kingside attack. So he brings the queen out to f6. The queen may slide across to h6. And there could be checkmating threats looming on h2. So white plays g3, trying to block out the threats before they even come into focus. Black plays bishop d7. White plays king g2. Rook fe8. And now rook ae1. I'm not at all sure about white's last 3 moves. It's my impression that white is losing his concentration and his focus in this position, and he's drifting. He's not making big mistakes yet, but he's certainly playing without a plan. Black, meanwhile, plays h6. Perhaps he's thinking of pressing forward with a kingside pawn attack, starting with g5. At any rate, white doesn't like that idea at all, so decides to try and stop him with h4. Well, black brings his queen to g6. And now, I suppose, white was thinking to himself, how on earth have I got myself into this mess? Black is possibly threatening to sacrifice a piece on g3. This will completely open up white's king and possibly give black a mating attack. Knight b3. Rook e6. Well, black of course here had the very tempting sacrifice available, bishop takes g3. Remember, checkmate ends the game. So if you can open up the enemy king like this, maybe you should certainly think about doing it. Black's forcing white's moves. If white blocks with the queen, then black comes in here, knight g3 check, landing a nasty fork. Note, in this variation, white is following black's lead. Black may take the queens off, take the rook, bishop takes f1. Or maybe black thought to himself, okay, I've got 2 pawns and a rook for 2 knights, but I'm not clearly winning this position. The sacrifice can wait for a better time. So going back to the game, Callenbach, I think, played a much better move here. Rook e6. Building up. Now, if the attack comes, it comes with the addition of an extra rook as firepower. Well, white is all over the place here. I think he's drifting, he's lost his focus, he plays rook h1, and now, of course, the sacrifice is very strong. Black comes crashing in with the knight. In comes the queen. King f1, queen takes f3, check. Well, what is white to play? If he plays queen f2, then black can play queen takes rook, check, which is disastrous for white. So going back, king g1, rook takes e3, black is powering in here. Once white lost his focus in the middle of this game, there was no way back, and you often find this in games between improvers. Pawn up to f4. If we count the pawns, we find that black is 3 pawns up. Bishop f5, and now black played rook e8, with the simple idea of playing the rook all the way down to e1. Checkmate. Summarising this first key concept. You've got to concentrate in chess all the way through the game. Try to get everything else out of your mind. Doesn't matter what it is. And focus on the game. Your results will immediately start to improve if you can do that. Well, following on then from concentration, my next tip is a very easy one to take on board. If you're an improver, keep it simple and stick to the basics. A lot of improving players get ideas above their station. They think they're stronger than they actually are, and this leads them into difficulty. In chess, you've got to get a solid grasp of the basics, whatever that might mean, before you go to the next level. So, for instance, get a good idea of what you should be doing in the opening, study a few basic endgames, keep your eye on tactics. Once you've done that, you can go forward. It's amazing for me to see how even semi-beginners get carried away with learning new openings and trying to take an enormous amount of information on board before they even know the basics of chess. So stick to the basics and you can't go wrong. Just to show you that even very strong grandmasters can falter sometimes in tactical situations where perhaps they try to move away from the basics, let's look at this short game from a tournament played in Holland in 1993 between Larry Christensen, one of the most ferocious attacking players in the world, many times US champion, and chess legend Anatoly Karpov, who was world champion for a decade and, well, is commonly regarded as one of the strongest players of all time. What happens in this game? Well, Karpov seems to have a mental block, a mental lapse somewhere, neglects the basics and loses the game as a result. I'm not going to concentrate too much on the opening moves of this game. This is a sophisticated opening called the Queen's Indian Defence. As you can see, black is attacking the pawn on c4, so white protects it with his queen. And now black, quite surprisingly, retreats the bishop. This might seem like already a neglect of the basics, moving a piece twice in the opening, but the thing is, Karpov figures that the queen is not ideal on c2, so he's happy to retreat, losing a move. Well, I'm not sure. I mean, this is definitely not an opening for beginners to play with black. You should be much more straightforward than the way Karpov's playing here. Don't get involved in openings where you've got to move to and fro with the same piece. This is crazy. You can't play like Karpov yet. Don't even try to. Well, Karpov attacks the centre. White takes the centre. Black takes on d4, knight takes d4, and then attacks the loose knight on d4 with knight c6. White takes on c6, getting rid of his problem, and then he brings his bishop out to f4. Well, that's a good move. The bishop takes up an imposing position in the middle of the board where it's controlling lots of squares. So probably Christensen was very happy with his position. Now Karpov makes a very strange move. A move which one would not even recommend to a beginner. He plays knight h5. Okay, says the beginner, well, he's attacking the bishop. Yes, says the slightly stronger player, but he's stranding the knight on the edge of the board. And a basic rule in chess is that a knight on the rim is dim. Well, in this case, the knight is very dim because Christensen just retreats his bishop, and now the knight on h5 is looking rather silly. Now, a really strong player like Karpov wouldn't play his knight to the edge of the board unless he had a clear idea what he was going to do next. This simply doesn't happen. But his plan is far too ambitious. He's neglecting the basics of chess. Another tactical basic is that you don't leave too many pieces unprotected. You see this so often in beginners' games. They put their pieces on bad squares, or insecure squares, or where the pieces are unprotected. We note here the bishop on d6 is unprotected, and the knight on h5 is unprotected. Clearly Black's idea was to support the move knight f4 when he played bishop d6. But he's overlooked the simplest of moves. Queen to d1. And this is what happens when you neglect the basics of chess. You make howlers which cost you the whole game. Black sees to his consternation that the white queen attacks two unprotected pieces, and Black cannot protect them both. Therefore he's losing a piece, and of course at this level, you know, a piece, well, even a pawn is going to cost you the game because these guys are so good. Karpov decided to resign. Okay, that's a very short game. But my point is clear. Don't run before you can walk in chess. Get a solid mastery of the basics at each level that you play. Well, following on from sticking to the basics, I'd like to make the point that chess is an attacking game. Therefore, you should concentrate on develop an aggressive style when you're starting out in chess. It's no good being defensive right from the word go. A lot of players are far too timid. They don't believe in themselves. They end up making mistakes as a result. They give themselves a lot of problems. Chess should be all-out attack when you're learning how to play. The advice of the old masters is clear. When you're starting out, learn to play gambits, learn how to sacrifice, develop tactical skills. This will stand you in good stead when you want to go to the next level. So don't be timid. Attack, checkmate should be the focus of your game when you're improving. What can an attacking style bring? Well, it can bring a lot of pleasure. Let's just focus on a game now from a tournament played in Iceland in 2010 to the next level. So don't be timid. Attack, checkmate should be the focus of your game when you're improving. What can an attacking style bring? Well, it can bring a lot of pleasure. Let's just focus on a game now from a tournament played in Iceland in 2010 to attack to begin with. Playing white in the coming game is a fellow called Andrei Vospernik, who's obviously an all-out aggression type of player. Here he plays the dangerous Danish gambit, an opening which I often recommend to young players when they're starting out. White is willing to sacrifice all manner of pawns to get his pieces into the game. And playing black in this game, somebody called Saga Kjartansdottir, who's obviously an improver, but who, well, is far too greedy in the opening stage of the game. She decides to take all the pawns on offer and finds herself seriously behind in development. One of the basics of chess in the opening phase of the game is very simple. You've got to get your pieces out. When you've got your pieces out, you can attack. Black in this game forgets to develop her pieces. Well, if you do that against anybody good, you're going to get crushed. This is the basic position of the Danish gambit accepted, where white has sacrificed two pawns. In return, white has what we call raking bishops. The bishop pair rake the black king side, making it very difficult for black to get the pieces out. However, it is possible for black to defend this position, And the best move is certainly, I think, to play d5. This is another basic rule of chess. Don't be too greedy in the opening. Be willing to give back the material you've gained in order to get a good position. And now the main line of the Danish gambit continues. Bishop takes d5. Knight f6 by black. And now the very interesting move, bishop takes f7. For an instant, it looks as though white has just won the game, because when black takes the bishop, the white queen comes down and nabs the black queen. But now comes the saving grace, bishop b4 check. We call this a discovered attack. Suddenly the black rook attacks the white queen. So white has to retreat his queen to keep material more or less level. And now we get a fairly balanced position, quite an interesting position, with black bringing the pieces into the game, attacking the pawn on e4, white defending the pawn, and now black pushing the pawn up on the queen side, and out comes the black knight. Both sides have a good position here. Black has emerged from the opening in very good shape. Well, of course, when we go back to bishop takes b2, virtually nobody at improvers level knows that theory, so, and especially at junior level. So white often gets a very strong attack playing the Danish gambit, and it can be recommended to young players. And particularly in this game, when black plays such a horrible move as f6. Now this really is a terrible move. Okay, black blocks the diagonal, but that's about all. In all other respects, this move is horrible. Black blocks in her knight, her queen, and opens up the king. Three terrible things from black's point of view with one move. And white decides, well, he doesn't even need to hurry this position. All he needs to do is to get his pieces out. So white plays very simply over the next couple of moves. He gets his knight out and he castles. When black pins the knight on f3, white just brings a further piece out with knight c3, and after knight c6 completes development with rook c1. And you see, how is black going to resolve this terrible traffic jam of pieces on the king side? Black can't even get her king to safety on g8. She can't even castle on the king side because she's played this really terrible move, f6. So black is in a mess. And the point of this very nice move, rook to c1, was to anticipate black castling on the queen side. Vospernek moves the knight into d5, which is a superb post for the knight, and now black castles on the queen side. But she castles straight in to a white attack. White pins the knight on c6 against the queen and causes black terrible problems. Black played queen e6 getting out of the pin, but now comes another very nice sacrificial move, rook takes c6. To a master, this is a fairly obvious stroke. For an improver, it's a really excellent move to play. After pawn takes rook, the bishop comes in, jamming up the black king position. And now black can't really extricate herself from this idea of checkmate, with the white queen coming out to a4, into a6, and then finally into b7 with checkmate. There's virtually nothing black can do about this because her position is a complete mess. She's all jammed up. Knight e7. Well, black could have tried to grab this pawn here with queen takes e4. At the very least, white can win the queen here with discovered attack. Knight to b6 check. Black takes the knight, white takes the black queen. This, of course, would be an easily winning position for white. So going back to the game, black played knight e7. White kept it simple. He took the knight and went through with the mating idea. And there's nothing black can do about it. Rook d7, queen takes a7. White finds even a different way to do it. And mate on the back rank follows. Queen to a8. So the point is that chess, when you're starting out, should be an attacking game. Focus on learning tactics and how to attack. This is a key concept. Don't get involved in defence when you're young, when you're ambitious, when you're starting out. Focus on aggression, all-out attack. The next idea is a very important one for all improvers and especially young players to take on board. Before you make any move, you should be ready to answer a simple question from somebody watching the game. If somebody asks you, why did you make that move? You should be able to tell them. If you can't give a good answer to that question, then you shouldn't make the move in the first place. Wait until you've got an idea behind every move you play. This is a really important idea because it teaches us about basic planning. Before we make a move, we've got some idea what we're going to do next. So just to reiterate, before you make a move, you should have some idea what you're going to do next. Imagine there's a spectator by the game who says to you, "Why did you make that move?" You should be able to answer them. Okay, now just to illustrate that point, I've chosen one of my own games. It comes from the Four Nations Chess League, which is a professional league played in England in 2004. I'm playing white, and playing black is the strong British player John Littlewood, FIDE master, that's International Chess Federation master, and Littlewood has been one of the strongest players in England for a long, long time. Let's just go through this game move by move, and I'll try and tell you what my thought processes were. Okay, well, if somebody asked me, why did you play knight f3? I would say it's a good developing move. It controls the central squares d4 and e5, and it also gives me lots of options. I haven't moved either of my central pawns yet, so I can put them wherever I want, and it's a very flexible idea, so that's what I like about it. Black responded in kind, and now I take the centre with d4, and it's a really simple move to understand. I like this move, and I played it because I'm taking the centre of the board with a pawn. Black does the same. Now white plays c4. This is a classical opening known as the Queen's Gambit. I was familiar with it, I was happy with it, and I was happy that black could take this pawn on c4. This is an opening called the Queen's Gambit accepted because I want to play e3 afterwards and to regain that pawn with bishop takes c4. So my simple idea in playing e3 is to be able to play bishop takes c4 next. I'm also aware that black can't play b5 in this position, or he shouldn't do, to protect the pawn. Obviously if black could do that, then my whole opening idea wouldn't be very good, but I think white can get the advantage here by hitting at the black pawns after a4. If black plays c6 to defend himself, white may be able just to take that pawn and once again hit at the black pawns with b3. Now I don't think black has any good way to continue to protect that pawn. He's probably got to settle for pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn check, bishop d7, and now queen takes b3, with a superior position for white. This was known to me, this is in the chess theory books, I was happy to play it. So going back to e3, this is why I made that move. Now Littlewood played bishop to g4, pinning the knight on f3. I played bishop takes c4 because I was simply thinking about recapturing the pawn. I've also set a little trap. If black plays a silly move, I can trap him with bishop takes f7 check. I mean, let's say black plays a crazy move here, a6. Now I go in with bishop takes f7 check, king takes bishop, and knight e5 check, which is a vicious fork. So this is why black has played e6, stopping me from doing that. I played h3. The purpose of that is to attack the bishop. I'm happy if black surrenders the bishop on f3, bishop takes f3, then I can simply recapture with my queen. Attacking b7, I've developed a piece, free of charge. Black has got nothing whatsoever in return for giving up that bishop. So black decided in the game to play bishop h5. I brought my knight out. If somebody asked me why I did that, I would say it's a normal developing move. It controls the centre. It brings a new piece into play. Simple and effective chess. Black played a6. I'm unsure about that move, but I know many grandmasters have played it. The idea, it seems to me, is to perhaps prepare the move b5, or possibly to keep a white knight out of b5, should that knight ever wish to go there. I don't particularly like that move, I have to say. I think it's rather slow. If I was black, I would be concentrating on getting my pieces out. So I'd be looking at moves like bishop e7, preparing to castle, or possibly knight c6. Both of these moves I know have been played. But Littlewood played a6 and I played g4. This is not a move I would recommend to beginners, as it weakens the king side. However, white has an interesting idea in mind. I wanted to bring the knight in and win the bishop on g6. Black moved his knight back to d7, which also surprised me a little bit, because it kind of blocks in the knight on b8. I was very happy to see that move, and I went through with my idea of winning the bishop. And now the point of the whole idea, really, bishop f1. This looks like another very strange move, but there's a very clear reason I retreat my bishop to f1. I want whatever black plays to play it to g2. And now the bishop is on a perfect diagonal, putting pressure on the black queen side. So black blocks the diagonal with c6. Now I make another move which might look risky at first sight. Castles, but it's part and parcel of the whole scheme. It looks like white's opened up his king side, but in fact the king side is very solidly protected by the bishop on g2, and black can't really get in there to attack the white king. So I was happy to castle. Littlewood took on d4, and I played my next move because I simply wanted to recapture the pawn that Littlewood had gained. I could have taken with the queen, but the reason I didn't do that was that I didn't want to keep my bishop on c1 blocked in, and I didn't like the idea that perhaps black could offer the exchange of queens here with queen to f6. I didn't want the queens off the board at this stage. I knew that Littlewood was a player who would have been happy with a position like this, so I didn't want to create the type of position which he would like. Part of the art of playing chess is to get a position which you like and your opponent doesn't like. Well, we'll come on to that a little bit later in this series. But for the time being, I simply recaptured with the pawn. And also, and please note, I want to play rook e1 check, which brings my rook into the game straight away on the open file. Black blocked the open file, I took the open file, and black castled. So that is easy play by black. Queen to b3. Well, I played this move to attack b7. That's clear. Moreover, I didn't think it was easy for black to protect that square. He can't protect it with his queen, because his bishop on e7 would be vulnerable to the attack of my rook. So I didn't think black had too easy a time of it after that move, and Littlewood decided to go for broke with the move bishop h4. This looks like a very risky move, but he's trying to get what we call counterplay against f2. I could have come down and taken on b7 in this position. I'm sure that's what a lot of players would have played. Black would have gone knight to b6 against that, and if I had continued to attack that knight with knight to a4, hoping for knight takes knight, queen takes rook, black might just complete his development, leaving my queen somewhat stranded. At any rate, I also knew that Littlewood was a very strong attacking player, so I decided to play a safer move here, bishop to e3. I keep my threats, I stop his threats, I protect f2, I reinforce d4. So lots of good things with one move. And I thought that at this point Littlewood was starting to feel uncomfortable. He played queen to b6. I took the queens off, and now I played pawn up to d5. Why did I do that? Well, first of all, I'm attacking the knight on b6. Secondly, I'm bringing my bishop into the game, the one on g2. That's the bishop black hasn't got. I've got a white square bishop. He hasn't got a white square bishop. So it makes sense to create play on the white squares. Two things with one move. Black brought his knight into c4, and I put my bishop on c5, simply attacking his rook on f8. That was the point of that move. Littlewood doesn't want his rook disappearing from the board, so he plays rook c8, and now I play my bishop into e7. And what I'm looking to do is exchange off all of black's active pieces. This is another master strategy. For the time being, all you need to know is that bishop takes e7, Rook takes e7, brings the white rook to a beautiful position on the 7th rank. From e7, white is attacking black's entire position. Littlewood did not like that and played an ugly move, f6, but he's being forced into these ugly moves by white's attacking play. I attacked his knight, driving it back. I moved my last piece into the game with rook a d1. This is another very good move. If somebody asked me why I played it, I would say, well, I'm bringing my last piece into play, I'm bringing it to a half open file, I'm reinforcing my central pawn, I'm making it very difficult for him to get his pieces out on the queen side. Littlewood took on d5, and now I took back with my knight. Well, the knight was under attack there from the black rook. So knight takes d5 is a simple move, getting the knight out of an attack. Black develops his knight to d7, and now rook e2. Well, there were several moves I could have played, but I wanted to increase my firepower on the central files. I'm looking to wait a move, I think, and I want to see what he's going to do. White can consider moves like rook to e1, doubling up, or he may even consider rook d2, doubling up on the d file. All of these options are open to me, and I'm leaving black thinking about what he's going to do next. Now black played a very peculiar move, rook a7. Well, there's no doubt about it, white is threatening knight takes b6, followed by bishop takes b7. This is a two-move combination which gives me a massive advantage. So I suppose he thought to himself, okay, well, I can protect that square. But of course there is a problem with this move, and I don't think Littlewood saw what I was going to do next. He took on b6, and now I played a very good move, one which I'm proud of, bishop d8. It's not often that you see a bishop, one of your own bishops, penetrating to the back rank of the enemy. Of course the bishop attacks the knight on b6 and actually forces the knight to move. It's very peculiar in this game how all of black's pieces have suddenly found themselves on very weird squares. I mean, you wouldn't normally see the pieces on these very odd squares. But I was proud of this game. I think I've actually forced his pieces to go to strange squares by dynamic play. The next stage of the game was to bring my rooks in, which I did by playing rook d7 and then rook e7. The scene is set for the final attack, as my rooks converge on g7. I played these moves because I simply wanted to checkmate him. There was no mercy now from me. I just wanted to finish the game as quickly as possible. Littlewood gave a token check. I just carefully retreated my bishop, blocking the check. And after rook c2, a last-ditch attack on f2, I ignored the threat and played rook takes g7 check. A move which forced Littlewood to resign this position. Let's just see why he does resign. After king h8, I planned the following checkmating combination. Rook h7 check, king g8. Well, now of course white can just take the bishop if he wants to be greedy, but when checkmate is on the board, you should always take the opportunity to do that. A series of checks forces the king to e8, and now the simple move bishop d6 sets up unstoppable mating threats with either rook g8 or rook h8. Bishop takes f2 check, king h1, and now black can't stop mate. Whatever he does, white gives checkmate on the back rank. So that was a very satisfying game, and all the way through I was able to explain to a spectator why I was making the moves I was. When you are able to do this in your own games, to explain to an observer what's going on, you'll find yourself really moving to the next level. You're already thinking about planning, you're thinking ahead, you're clarifying your thoughts in your own brain. A lot of beginners, a lot of improvers have very muddy thoughts about chess. They can't seem to focus on one thing or another. Their brain's all over the place. This discipline helps you to think more clearly, and that's why I'm recommending it to you on this DVD. There was an old player, Richard Teichmann, who said that chess is 99% tactics. And the debate has continued to the present day as to whether this statement is correct. But there's no doubt about it. Tactical control within a game is extremely important. and it's especially important when you're starting out in chess. A study of basic tactics is highly important. What this does is to make you a very difficult person to beat. You've often heard of the boxing match where the loser says, "I couldn't lay a finger on the champion." And the reason he can't lay a finger on the champion is simple. The champion has seen all his moves coming before he even thinks about executing them. That's what's known in the trade as tactical control. So study of tactics doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to let loose these tactics in the game. The fork, the pin, the skewer, the discovered attack, the decoy, all manner of tactical ideas. But what it will mean is that it gives you control of the game. And control of the game is what strong players like, because it gives them the opportunity to execute their plans. Now let me give you an example now of what tactical control is all about. Again, I'm going to use one of my own games. It comes from a tournament played in England back in 1984, and playing white is the international master from India, Ravi Kumar. The opening is known as the Nimzo Indian defence, and it's characterised by the pinning move bishop b4. This is a very good opening to play for any level of player, although it's quite a sophisticated opening. By pinning the knight, black controls the e4 square, and he makes it very, very difficult for white to play the move e4. After all, that's the move white wants to make in this position if he can, which will grab the centre. So bishop b4 pins the knight and controls the centre because of the pin. Ravi Kumar's next couple of moves are fairly standard. Whilst black castles, white brings his bishop out to d3, perhaps renewing the threat of e4. So this is why black plays d5. So I was pleased with this move. It's another standard move in this position. Black takes the centre. He controls the position tactically by stopping white from breaking free with the move e4, and it's a very constructive move. White is getting sick and tired of the pin, and he plays a3, and black is happy to just take the knight on c3 and play pawn up to c5 because it doesn't waste any time. And again, black is looking just as much as white is really to challenge for the centre of the board in the opening. Well, now we get a rather confusing position, but the more you think about it, the more really the tactics are under control from black's point of view. White took on d5, and that's a good move because it gets rid of the double pawns. And black was happy to take back with the pawn. You'll note that white is being allowed to play pawn takes pawn, but that really is a very bad move. White gains a pawn temporarily, but just look at his pawn structure. I'll be talking a little bit about pawn structure in the intermediate DVD, the second DVD in this series. But we call this type of pawn on a3 isolated pawn, and we call these pawns on c3 and c5 doubled isolated pawns. Basically, they're very bad. So black could easily regain his pawn here with a simple move like queen a5. I mean, black probably has other moves in this position, but that's simple enough. And black, in view of the double attack on c5 and c3, gets his pawn back with the better game. He's got more pieces developed. He's got pressure on the weak white pawns. So going back to the game, Ravi Kumar just develops his knight with knight e2. And black, well, black's got a small catching up session to do with development on the queen side. So b6 was played. Castles by white, knight c6, knight g3, and now I put my knight on a5, and white decided to play f3. Rook e8. Right, so what are the respective plans in this position? Black is trying hard to stop white from playing e4. As I said, in the opening phase of the game, white was trying to get this move in. Well, we've reached the early middle game, and white is still trying to get the move e4 in. It looks as though white can play that move, but black is keeping the position under tactical control. Because if white plays e4 in this position, black would take on d4, and then he'd take on e4, with a sudden attack on the pawn at d4. White doesn't really want to give up his light square bishop in this position, but he would probably have to in order to save that pawn on d4. Anyway, black plays knight takes bishop with a very comfortable game. So going back to rook e8, I was happy that for the time being I had stopped white from executing his plan, and Ravi decided to play rook a2. This looks a very strange move, but white's plan is to introduce the rook into the game, maybe on e2, and then again to go through with his plan of e4. Possibly after rook e2, white would need to play bishop b2 first in order to keep the pawn on d4 protected. But rook a2 is a good move. Now I took on d4. Well, again, a tactical move, because if black is trying to stop white from playing e4, this is a very good move. White certainly doesn't want to take back with the e-pawn in this position, because it would mean he can't get the move e4 in. So Ravi takes back with the c-pawn. And now comes another very good tactical manoeuvre. Knight to b7, rook e1, bishop e6. Again, a good move, preventing white from playing e4, because if he goes e4, we take that pawn, and suddenly there's a discovered attack on the rook. So after bishop e6, white played rook f2. Black played rook to c8. There is still difficulty for white in playing that move e4, because once again this pawn will be attacked. So white goes bishop b1, and now black plays knight to d6. So we're reaching really the critical position of the game. It's still very, very difficult for white to play this move e4 easily, and if he doesn't get e4 in, his position is not easy to play, because he can't get this bishop on c1 into the game. Basically the move e4 liberates that bishop and makes it easier for white to handle the position. But black is controlling the game using tactical ideas to help him. Anyway, Ravi played queen to d3. Now the name for this setup is a battery. A battery is two or more pieces acting together against a certain point in the enemy camp. So the queen and the bishop would very much like to come down to h7 and give checkmate. So possibly white is thinking about a move like knight h5. That's what we call a decoy. White decoys the knight away from f6 in order to get down to h7. Black plays bishop d7, getting out of the way. White went h3. Just going back, I suppose white could, if he wanted to, play knight h5 in this position. But after that, I think black again gets a pretty comfortable game by going bishop f5, covering all bases. White would have to take on f6, and then black recaptures with the queen. All white has achieved really is to develop black's pieces for him. So white decided just to play h3. Black blocks the diagonal. This is a good idea in many positions where the enemy is challenging on a diagonal. If you just put a pawn in front of the pieces on that diagonal, you block them out of the way. White got his bishop onto the modest square d2. Black attacked the white queen. The queen moved to b3. Black attacked the white queen again, and white moved his queen back to b2. So around here, white was getting quite frustrated. Although it's 25 years or so ago, I can still remember the sense of frustration I felt coming across me from the other side of the board. White is no further down the line towards playing e4 than he was 10 moves ago, let's say, and without that move, as I've said before, white cannot really activate his pieces. Bishop a6 dropping out of the way, possibly making room for the knight to come to c4, which is a fork. And now, against his better judgment, white moves forward with e4. White is getting sick and tired of being frustrated from playing that move, and now he decides to play it, although I think it's probably the wrong moment. Knight c4. Quite a nasty fork. The white queen must keep on the pawn at d4. I took the bishop on d2, white recaptured. I took the pawn on e4, f takes e4, and now a move Ravi Kumar had missed, a tactical shot, knight to d5. And this was my plan. There are a whole sea of dark squares in the white camp just waiting to be exploited. The black knight has tremendous prospects here. He can come to c3, he can come to e3, he can come to f4, and black is also threatening to bring the queen into the game with the help of queen g5. Suddenly black has the better game, and white went through with e4 at the wrong moment. Ravi Kumar tried king h2, protecting the knight. It's a common master idea. If you can't see what to do, you make a move which strengthens your position slightly, and in this case white just protects the unprotected knight on g3. Black brings his queen out to g5. That's part of the business. You'll note that the pawn on e4 is still pinned. If white takes on d5, the black rook comes down here with a ruinous capture on e1. So after queen g5, white went rook to c2, hoping to swap off and somehow to nullify black's pressure by swapping off. In came the black knight. If you can establish a knight in the heart of your opponent's position, then it's usually a good thing to do. As long as the knight can't be ejected or just attacked and to move aside, this is a very good idea. Ravi Kumar went rook c3, and now another tactical move, which I'm sure he, if not overlooked, underestimated. Knight takes g2. Well, it's not good anymore for white. If white takes this knight, there is an absolutely killing check on d2. That's a fork. Both rooks are attacked. If the knight comes back to e2, this really doesn't help. Black can simply take it off, and white is still faced with this same dilemma. So knight takes g2 was answered by rook g1. Again, white has failed to lay a glove on black in this game because of tactical control. Knight comes to h4. Queen comes to b2, which cuts out black's check on d2 with the queen. Rook takes c3. Queen takes c3, and now rook c8. So again, a small tactical operation which results in black taking the open file. Queen goes to b3. In comes the black queen to d2. King goes to the corner, and now a final very nice move to finish, rook to c1. Again, tactically based, pinning the rook on g1 and threatening queen to g2, checkmate, which is about as unstoppable as a threat can be. So, although that game was played at the master level, it's an object lesson from my perspective on tactical control. So remember, learn basic tactics. Learn the concept of tactical control in your games. Tactical control gives you command of the position. It will stop your opponent from laying a glove on you the whole game through. Following on from the idea that tactics are extremely important so that we get some element of control over the position, we come now to the types of mistakes that are made in a game of chess and what you can do about it to stop them. Obviously, as an improver, we're looking to avoid game-losing mistakes. This is what I've noticed in the games of young players and improving players, no matter what their age is. As you get stronger and stronger, the mistakes that are made on the chessboard become smaller and smaller, until at the World Championship level they become almost imperceptible. You can hardly discern them. Only a very strong player can work out what they are and take advantage of these very small errors. But at lower levels, and particularly at the lowest level, let's say when you're just starting out, usually it's game-losing mistakes that cost the point. Big howlers, massive blunders. And I think I've developed a formula which will help you to eliminate these types of blunders from your play. Now, it's worthwhile noting the type of mistakes that are commonly made on the chessboard. The types of moves we overlook. Well, it's well known in chess that the types of moves that are commonly overlooked are backward moves and sideways moves. That's because we're conditioned to move forward in life. Life just goes forward at a pace. We can't go backwards. We can't really tread on the spot, no matter how hard we will convince ourselves that we're doing that. And somehow the brain finds it really difficult to see these moves, backward moves and sideways moves. So it's a good idea to bear that in mind. A lot of blunders are made precisely because we overlook such moves. Also, surprise moves, it seems to me, in games between improvers really do make a big difference. Things like checks and captures. Sometimes I see young players missing captures entirely. They can take a piece, they don't take a piece. The enemy takes off one of their pieces, they're completely surprised by this. And also, checks tend to really worry up-and-coming players. So what you should do before each move is made is just to check all the checks in a position and all the captures in your mind. It really is as simple as that. It will be very laborious at the start. I mean, the strong player, the Grandmaster, really does this automatically. He or she doesn't need to think about this. It's done automatically in their heads because they've done it so many times. Their mental memory is ready for this, and the brain is automatically registering all the dangerous moves. But for the beginner, check all the checks and all the captures in a position before you make each move. And do bear in mind that retreating moves and sideways moves are the most commonly overlooked moves in chess. Well, now we come to a game, an old game, but an absolute classic. A game between Wilhelm Steinitz, who was world champion back in the 1890s, and he's playing a very famous player from the 19th century, Louis Paulsen. And let's go through this game, trying to use our formula, checking all the checks and the captures, and looking out for blunders, and we'll see where it leads us, if it helps us. Well, Steinitz kicked off with e4. Black played e5. No checks and captures yet. Knight c3, knight c6. And now we come to the first capture in the game. Well, if I was black, I would certainly take that pawn on f4. Steinitz has played a very dangerous opening called the Vienna Gambit. Basically, this is an attacking option for white, but the way Steinitz plays it is so risky, it can't be recommended to the average player. For instance, he takes the centre in the opening with d4. Now that looks good, but it does give black a very dangerous attacking option, which if you were checking the checks and captures with black, you would immediately see. You would see queen h4 check, and that's precisely what Paulsen played. Now it might be interesting to note that Steinitz was doing this deliberately. He really firmly believed that control of the centre offset an awkward king position right at the start. He tried to convince himself, I think, that black didn't really have enough pieces out to take advantage of the very exposed white king, and it was much more important to have the centre at this early stage. Well, I don't know, but clearly this is not an opening one can recommend to players who are starting out. I mean, this is not sticking to the basics, as we outlined earlier. This is far from the basics. White is being deliberately provocative, and he's almost encouraging black to go over the top, attacking his king. Well, these are advanced tactics, more of that later. For the time being, if you were white, let's say, going back one move in this position, and you were checking all the checks and captures, you quickly see that queen h4 check was dangerous. So I would strongly recommend the move knight f3 here, in order to stop that move, and perhaps d4 later. Anyway, Steinitz played d4, queen h4 check, king e2, and black played d6. A modest move, but there's no doubt about it, black is thinking about putting this bishop out on g4. So white played knight f3, and black did indeed play bishop g4, pinning the knight on f3. Well, there's a capture available for white. Bishop takes f4. Of course, when Steinitz played this move, he would have to have worked out that black couldn't have played bishop takes f3 on this move, which uncovers an attack of the black queen against the white bishop. Here, white was boldly going to play king takes f3. A remarkable move, which is based on the notion that if black checks on h5, white can block with g4. And this remarkable position continues with black really having wasted time over the last couple of moves. He surrendered his bishop, his valuable bishop on c8, and the white king looks reasonably safe because black hasn't got enough pieces out to attack it. So going back to bishop takes f4, Steinitz can get away with this move tactically. It's all about tactical control. Black decided to get on with development and castle on the queen side. Well, just going back, I mean, if I was black in this position, I really would be very tempted to try and smash open the white king position by playing f5. But that's a discussion for the next game. So going back to the game, black castled on the queen side. White moved his king yet again. Remarkable move. And black played queen h5. Well, black could have considered bishop takes f3 in this position, the capture, but it's not clear what that move does. At the same time, by playing king e3, white introduces the threat of knight takes h4, which is a dangerous capture. So obviously Paulson felt he had to move his queen. So white played bishop e2, and black ran away, queen a5. This is a sign, a clear sign, that black has been put off his stride by white's extraordinary opening. I mean, how often do you see the white king on e3? And he's running around the board with his queen, when really he should have been thinking about, if you just go back one move, getting those pieces out on the king side. But obviously white was perhaps threatening a move like h3, for instance. If black plays the normal move here, knight f6, white can go h3, and this move is a little bit awkward for black, because if he surrenders his bishop, white recaptures, and now once again the black queen is not very well placed. And I should stress, black has no way to take advantage of this extraordinary position of the white king. Okay, so black played queen a5 in the game, and now white played a3. And black's problem is his queen is running out of squares. Bishop takes f3. Well, that's an interesting capture. And now at this stage, Steinitz probably was trying to figure out what the point was of this move. I think the main reason black played this move was he anticipated that white would recapture with the bishop when he's going to play g5. This gives black some counterplay. The bishop is attacked. When the bishop retreats, black's bishop would come to g7, putting pressure on the d4 square. Extraordinarily, going back to the game, therefore, Steinitz recaptured with the king. And black obviously was tempted by giving a check, so he brought his queen across to h5. King went to e3, moving out of the check. Queen went to h4. And now white played b4. Well, black doesn't have many threats in this position. He's got no dangerous checks with his queen. He's got no dangerous checks with any other of his pieces because he hasn't developed them yet. And he's got no captures available which make any sense. So white just gets on with the attack. The point of b4 is to advance the pawns against the black king. If black is doing nothing, white may as well start an attack. So black did something. He pushed his pawn up to g5. And now, checking all the captures, we see that black is threatening to take white's bishop with check. The bishop retreated. Queen goes back to h6. Pawn pushes on to b5. And black retreats. Knight c e7. Now I did mention at the start of this take that retreating moves were among the most difficult to see in chess. But really, what were black's choices in this position? He could go to the edge of the board, but that looks like a horrible square for the knight. You've got to think where you're placing your pieces in chess. You know, this is such an important aspect to the game when you're a beginner. It's all right to put the knight on that square, but where's the knight going? When a piece has absolutely nowhere to go from a certain square, it's usually very badly placed. And here, white can even think about trying to attack and win that knight on the edge of the board. A knight on the rim is dim, as they say, and in this case, doubly so. So black decides to retreat to the safety of his army. Rook comes to f1, a very nice file to take, attacking the pawn on f7. That would be very much a capture white would like to make, so black blocks it by playing knight f6. And now Steinitz really concocts an extraordinary manoeuvre, continuing to move his king back to g1. And would you believe, after 18 moves, the white king has moved 6 times, and he's managed to get to a normal castling position at the same time. It's incredible, you know, Steinitz was able to bamboozle his opponents using these tactics. And black has been completely outplayed already. White's got 2 bishops. Is an important aspect to the position. He's already got a dangerous looking pawn advance against the black king. His king seems very safe, amazingly, and black has no counterplay. That is to say, a way of playing the position which gives him the attack. Well, also white's got a threat. He's threatening to capture rook takes f6. So black dealt with that by protecting the knight with his queen. White just built up, as grandmasters do. Queen came to d2 to attack the pawn on g5. So black protected against that capture. Now white advanced on the queen side with a4 and sacrificed a pawn with b6. And here Steinitz really starts to show his class. Well, I think he's already showed his class in this game by playing in this extraordinary and original manner. But you could have said that a lesser player would have been playing with the white pieces so far. But this type of move is really excellent. White sacrifices a pawn to open up the black king. This pawn sacrifice also gives him a lot of time. Whilst all the black pieces are massed on the king side doing absolutely nothing, I mean, if black is given 5 or 6 moves, he might get an attack against the white king. But the idea of b6 is to give black absolutely no time. Black must make a capture because white's threatening b takes a7 here, which would win outright if it were allowed. So black must take that. And now comes another extraordinary move here. Rook takes f6. This is tactical control. Steinitz sees that the knight on f6 is guarding the critical square g4. Black must recapture on f6. In comes bishop g4 check. King comes to b8. In comes the knight to d5. With each of these moves, white is gaining time. The queen comes back to g7, and now this beautiful move a5, which includes every single white piece in the attack. White simply threatening to capture a takes b6, opening up the file, and then his rook and his queen would pile in against the poor black king. Well, f5 was played by Paulsen. This is a rather desperate move. Nothing is working for black in this position because white's attack is too fast. Steinitz ignores the attack on his bishop. Black recaptures. Well, it's worthwhile noting in this position that if black takes this bishop on g4, the obvious capture, white would recapture on c7, and now what is black to play? If he plays king c8, we bring our rook all the way down, and then we can take on d8, making a new queen with checkmate to follow. Very nice finish to the game. Tactical control and control of the checks and captures all in one. So going back to the game, black recaptures on b6, and now white goes knight takes b6. And again, this is a very well calculated idea. If black takes on g4, we bring our rook in, rook a8 check, king comes to c7, and now another very nice move here, queen c3 check. Well, black has only got one move, he must take the knight. Queen a5 check, king c6, another check, ruinous for black, king d7, and now queen takes d8, checkmate. Beautiful. So going back to the game, and after knight takes b6, Paulsen tried to defend himself with knight e7. E takes f5, pausing for an instant to get rid of the threat to g4. Queen f7, white pushed on with f6, uncovering an attack from the bishop on g4. Black rushed his knight across to try and help the defence, and now c4. A remarkable move, really, in the middle of this attack. Slowly but surely, white builds his attack, and because black has no good captures, good checks, good tactical moves at his disposal, he can't do anything. Knight a7 was played. Queen went to a2. Now white's piling in with his queen and his rook. Knight went to b5. Black's desperately trying to bail out here by offering the exchange of queens. If white makes the obvious capture on b5, then black can survive for a little bit longer by taking off the queen. Well, no way does white do that. He could have played queen a8 check and then queen a5. This would also have been very strong, but in the game he prefers knight d5. Now queen a8 checkmate is very hard to stop. Black made a final capture, queen takes d5, but this is absolutely nothing for white to worry about. Black should have resigned. Instead, he allows white to really finish him off in a beautiful way. Rook takes c6, checkmate. Well, that was a super game. Now, just to review the main idea of this section. Following on from the idea that tactical control is important, before you make every move, check the checks, check the captures in a position. And remember, sideways moves and backward moves are the most difficult moves in chess to see. This is going to be a laborious process at first. It's going to be boring. It's going to take time to check religiously all the captures and the checks. But I assure you, it will add tactical control to your game. And that, at the improvers level, is what you need. I want to talk a little bit now about the best way to organise your time at home if you want to improve at chess. No matter what your level, not everybody can afford a coach, and it's important to use your time really, really effectively at home in the best possible way. For improvers, the very best way is study chess a little bit each day, and I generally recommend something like 20 minutes a day for young players and improving chess players. But for those 20 minutes, you have to give 100% attention to what you're doing. Now, when you're studying chess, and I mean every day, every single day, even Christmas Day, your birthday, your holidays, whatever, just set aside a little bit of time each day to study chess. If you run the numbers on this one, you'll find that 20 minutes a day equates to 1 hour and 40 minutes a week, 52 weeks a year. Okay, you're looking at about, about 80, 90 hours per year studying chess. Well, for improvers, for each of those 80, 90 hours a year, I'd be looking to improve, say, half a grading point in local currency. So if you're improving 45 points a year, whether it be ELO points or in your local grading system, that's a big improvement. And if you look at it over 5 years, okay, that's going to slow down, because the better you get at chess, the more difficult it is to rack up those rating points. But if you look at it, the initial improvement is really good. And that's a very modest half a rating point per hour put in at the board. What type of routine should you work out for yourself? Well, it's got to be varied. And when you're starting out in chess, by far the most important thing is to play. You've got to play, I would say, a lot more than you study. Probably for every 3 hours of study, you should be playing 4 hours of chess. So get onto the internet, to either Internet Chess Club, to Play Chess, or to Chess Cube. Get yourself an account and start playing chess. A variety of opponents at a variety of time levels. Variety is the spice of life, and this is true for the studying as well. Studying tactics, studying end games, looking over games of great players is a really good way to improve. I know players really who hardly play chess over the board, and simply by studying at home, looking over game anthologies or games from the newspapers, high level games, that they were able to improve at a massive rate. But of course, you've got to have the self-discipline to do it. And if there are any kids watching this DVD, you'll know that you have a lot of things which you're interested in. But if you can set aside 20 minutes a day, and that's not a lot to ask, you will make a massive improvement. Coming back to this idea of playing, if you can get lots of different types of opponents, then this is the best way to structure your playing schedule. You should be very happy to play weak opponents. You can thrash them, but in the end you don't learn very much from thrashing weak opponents. What you do get, of course, is a confidence boost. That's good. The best opponents to learn from are players who are slightly better than you. Not players who are much better, although it's quite humbling and also quite good to play players who are much better than you, because then you'll get thrashed yourself. And when you get thrashed, you tend to think a lot about why you got thrashed. And just by thinking in that manner, that is how you improve. But the people who are slightly better than you can teach you lessons which you can understand. Which brings me to my next game. It was from the British Championship in 2010. And it's a game between International Master Alexei Slavin and the Super Grandmaster Michael Adams. Now at this level, you might think, oh, there's a huge difference between the top world-class Grandmaster and the good International Master, but that's not true. The difference is actually not that great, but it's great enough for Slavin to have learned some very valuable lessons from this game. Now you might think, why is he showing me these Grandmaster games? I'm only an improver. Well, I've learned as a coach it's very important not to dumb down the audience. By showing them Grandmaster games, you're immediately getting them used to looking at high-level chess. This is where you really improve. Don't be satisfied with second best. Go for the best games you can find. Well, Slavin was white, and he played the very solid Queen's Pawn, and Michael Adams responded with, again, a very, very solid way of playing the Queen's Indian defence. Black's setup is harmonious. He's probably going to put his bishop on b7, which controls a nice diagonal. The bishop on f8 is free, and very importantly, Black gives himself lots of options with his pawns. He can put these pawns on d7 and c7 wherever he likes. So it's a very flexible setup. Well, White played his bishop to d3. Now a word or two about White's setup. White played this weird move e3. It's weird to an improver, but to Slavin it was part and parcel of his opening system. Basically, when you play such a move, you've got to have a very good idea what you're going to do with the bishop on c1. That bishop can't stay there for long, blocked in. So White's probably thinking about playing b3 and bishop b2 to improve the lot of that bishop. Without these moves, White's setup makes no sense whatsoever. So we're waiting to see White getting that bishop into the game. White's setup, though, is not dangerous. It's just quiet. And it shows respect for the opponent, really. I mean, I think Slavin's possibly showing Michael Adams too much respect. The general procedure for weaker players when they're playing a very strong opponent is to try to get the attack. Well, knight e5. Again, this is a move which I'm not sure about. Possibly Slavin was trying to get Michael Adams into an unfamiliar position, but I'm really not sure about that move. I mean, I think when Black plays d5, White should just settle for b3 to get his bishop out, as directed. Okay, this is going to lead to a roughly balanced position, but that's maybe the best White can do. Adams keeps it simple, using one of our maxims earlier. You know, this applies even at Grandmaster level. He can't quite see what White's up to, so he settles for just simple development. One piece after the other. Pawn up to c5, taking the centre, castling on the king side, bishop to d6. It's very harmonious for Black. And he's saying to White, well, try and make headway against this. You've obviously put your knight on e5. You're maybe thinking of a kingside attack. I think your game is slow. I think you can't mate me using these slow means. So I'm just going to get my pieces out and you can do what you must. It's very hard for White to make progress against Black's position. And this is the way Adams plays. He plays very, very solidly. He's a player who has superb tactical control. And because of this, he's able to eventually beat even the strongest of opponents. Well, White played b3, showing respect for his bishop. And now Black played a very interesting move here, b5. The point of this move is purely tactical. If we check all our captures and our checks, we see that White can take this pawn. But Black was intending to go c takes d4 after that. And if c takes d4, Adams was going to play queen to b6, with the double attack on the bishop and the pawn. If the Black queen's allowed to come into d4 check, that's a very nasty fork. The White king and the White rook in the corner is forked. Black didn't like that at all. He played c3 and Black played b4. So what Slavin has learned already from this game is that you can't take liberties against strong players. Yes, you can play all this slow stuff. It might intimidate weaker players, but it will not worry the very strongest players. So he's obtained no advantage from the opening whatsoever against Adams. In fact, he may even be slightly worse. And He'll have to play something different next time. Okay, white's got to make the best of it now. He took on b4. Black took on d4, messing up the white pawns. And now black holds a slight advantage. White has what we call here an isolated pawn on d4. It's isolated because it can't be protected by any of its own pawns. It's weak, it can be attacked. Black has no weakness in his camp which white can attack. That is why black has the advantage. It's not much, but it's something. And super grandmasters like to work with small edges. They know that the opponent's not likely to make huge game-losing blunders, so they just work with small edges, build their position, small improvements, bit by bit, bit by bit. It's like Chinese water torture. Eventually, the opponent collapses because the super grandmasters accumulated all these advantages to make something big. Well, white continues, defending his pawn. He brings his knight across to defend. Black brings his bishop back to d6. And now white goes a3. This is an interesting move. I remember I was watching this game at the time, and to play these moves, Slavin was using up an awful lot of time. This is another characteristic of playing stronger players. They force you to think about the position a lot, much more than you would normally do. It's like an intimidation in a way. And white spent an eternity on this move a3. What he was obviously working out was that after queen takes b3, rook a b1, queen retreats, bishop a1 attacking the queen, queen c7, rook fc1, he would have compensation for the pawn based on attacking power of his rooks on the queen side. Well, again, Adams makes a very interesting move here, a5, and he made it immediately. So whereas Slavin was thinking for half an hour on this move, a3, working out all the complications, Adams just thinks, okay, well, I'm not going to go for any of those complications. Why should I? Even if they are good for me. I'm just going to make a practical move, a5. You've wasted half an hour on the clock. And indeed, a5 is a very good move. So Slavin also learns that practicality in chess is very important. No good spending half an hour on a clock and getting into time trouble if you make mistakes later on. Keep it natural, keep it simple. Rook ac1, well, that's not too bad, bringing a rook to the open file. Bishop takes e5, f takes e5, and now knight e4. Bishop takes e4, d takes e4, and now Slavin makes a very strange move. Knight g5. This is a clear sign to me that he's actually afraid of Adams. I think against virtually any other opponent, he would have taken that pawn on e4. I mean, white had to play that move. Adams has deliberately given away that pawn, mind you, because he intends to go knight e7. The idea of this is to open up the long diagonal for his bishop. That bishop on b7 has become extremely powerful. The knight on e7 is getting ready to station itself on beautiful squares in the centre. And black still has the attack on b3. So black has what we call really good compensation for the pawn. But white had to play this way. He had to. I think after the game, Slavin would reflect on this position and think to himself, well, I definitely showed a lack of courage here. And that's another very common thing when you're playing really strong players. For some reason, players lose their bottle. They don't play moves they would normally make because they're just worried that the opponents see more than they have. You've got to believe in yourself in chess. Well, after knight takes d4, white's position goes downhill very quickly. Adams just won that pawn in the centre. He attacks the knight. Slavin tries a desperate last stab at counterplay. It's no good. He comes in with a check, king g8, and now white has no moves. If he takes the bishop, as he did, queen a1 check, forces checkmate. The white king is trapped on the back rank. So when you're playing, and you're playing a variety of opponents, however you like to work it out, try to learn something from every game you play. Slavin would have learned a lot from this game by playing a slightly better opponent. He would have learned that his whole opening strategy was too slow. He would have learned something about himself, that he lacked courage in certain positions against really strong players. He didn't have the confidence to play complex positions. And he would also learn that tactical control position is really, really important. Adams had that tactical control, he didn't. Well, I talked a little bit about the best way to structure your training schedule at home in the last example, and we talked about playing opponents. Now, what about the study of chess? Well, certainly you've got to recognise that endgames are very important. But at improvers level, perhaps you should only study the basic endgames. And by basic endgames, I mean the basic checkmates, the very basic king and pawn endings, like the one in front of you, and the very basic rook endings. I haven't got time here to deal with all those endgames, but I just think it's really important to bring this point in front of you. The greatest players thought that chess should be studied backwards. You should look at the endgame first, then go on to looking at the middle game, and only in the final analysis be looking at opening theory. In practice, a lot of players study chess the other way around. They think by learning tricky and trappy openings they're going to win a lot more games. But in the long run, they don't give themselves a general understanding of the game. So, however you structure your time, don't ignore basic endgames. And perhaps the one we have in front of us is one of the most important endgames of all. White to move wins this position in the following manner. First of all, he moves his king up to d2, and black plays king e7. I have seen improvers, and especially young players, fluff this endgame up time and again. I mean, you have to recognise that this game could easily have occurred after, well, hours of play. You could have been playing for hours with white to get to a position where you're a pawn up. Now you have to realise this advantage, you have to make a new queen, and after that you have to checkmate the opponent. Without a knowledge of basic endgame positions, you might not be able to do that. I've seen countless young players mess this position up. The most important principle you have to know is to get the king in front of the pawn. So white's next move, king e3, is a very good idea. Now the two kings are in what we call opposition, in the middle of the board. And with black to move, black has to give way. He goes to one side or the other, and now white bypasses him by playing king to d5. King must come back to e7, and again white takes up what we call the opposition. Note white is not touching his pawn just yet. It's sufficient to drive the black king back. Again white plays a bypass manoeuvre, and black retreats to e8. Now a lot of players think, well, okay, if white's going there, I'm going to try and move my king towards the pawn. Well, only now does white start pushing his pawn. I think you will find this move transposes to our game as black is starting to go backwards. Going back to the game, black plays king e8, and now white plays the final killer move, king e6. This is the winning position you should keep in your mind. This is the chunk of information which will be sufficient to help you throughout your chess career to play this position correctly. Black moves aside, white can push his pawn, black moves aside, white pushes his pawn again, black moves aside, and now the final bypass, king f7. Basically, black's king was stuck for space once white had cramped him on e6. He has to come forward, and now white marches in and wins the game by promoting to a queen. Okay, if you learn the basic mates, you will know that white can win this position in 10 moves or less from any position. Let's go through it now, following on. The golden rule in this position is to move your king closer to his king whenever possible. So here's the first move by white, moving the king close to the black king. Black sticks around in the middle for as long as he can. And now white plays the first very subtle move here, queen e3. Basically you keep your queen a knight's move away from the king. This cuts down on what black can do. Well, black wants to keep off the side or away from the white king in this example, so he runs. And now white plays the third excellent move, king e5, bringing his king close to the black king. And that's the third move in this position. And you can see black is already down to only 2 squares. He's really struggling. Okay, he runs away. Well, we can bring our king closer, so we shall. That's 4 moves. Black makes a nondescript move, and now white closes in for the kill on his 5th move. And now you can see that black has to go to the side of the board. He wants to keep off the side, but he's got no choice. So he goes to the side. White moves in for the kill. 6 moves. King must go to a5. And now queen comes to a3, checkmate. Finish. If you've got a good knowledge of these basic positions, it's going to really help you. We come now to an interesting observation. A lot of players think the great players make a game look easy. It doesn't matter what game you're playing. It could be tennis, golf, football, whatever game. The great players really make it look easy. But they make it look easy because they've got a fantastic command of basic technique. That is what you should set out your stall to acquire right at the start of your playing career. And the basic technique starts here by looking at basic endgames. So don't neglect the basic endgame. My next tip is also a very straightforward one, and you'll learn a lot if you put it into practice. It is simply to write all your games out and to try and look them over with a stronger player. This might be a slightly stronger player than yourself. It's somebody who's going to be able to give you good advice about the way you play. I did mention earlier that it wasn't necessary to have a coach. For instance, I didn't have a coach, and most of the leading players of my generation in the English chess explosion also learned solely by playing chess on the weekend circuit that we had in England at that time in the 1970s and 1980s, and also by studying very, very hard by themselves at home. However, it's always useful to have the respected advice of a stronger player. Now, of course, I'm not talking about writing every single game out that you play, especially the quick play games, but certainly every game of, say, half an hour each and more, it would be really useful to be able to write out those games. Now, if I was offering advice, let's say I'm going to show you a game now from the European Team Championship under 18, so a game between two young players, two talented young players. This game was played in 2008, and White comes to me and says, I lost this game in 15 moves. What advice would you be able to offer me? Okay, well, let's see the game now. I would go through the game with this fellow and try to pick out the critical moments in the game where he might have gone wrong, or also it's a good idea to concentrate on your strengths. So I wouldn't necessarily criticise him too much for losing in 15 moves. I'd try to look at things which he did well as well and try to work on those more than I would work on his weaknesses. Anyway, we've got an opening here called the centre counter defence, where Black brings his queen out provocatively at the start. White attacks the queen, that's the main line move, and the queen moves out of harm's way. White pushes his pawn up to d4, Black brings the knight out to f6, and both sides go through a period of development here. Now White puts his bishop on a dangerous diagonal, setting up tactical ideas against the Black queen. So I would say to the White player, who's called Andrew Green, he's playing a player called Alyosha Tomazzini, that White was playing rather well in this position. He's played a dangerous idea, he set up tactical chances for himself, very good. And now Black plays a very interesting move, bishop to g4. This is interesting, it's a counter-attack against the White queen. It's also quite a provocative move, because Black is giving White a free move. The move f3. The question is, does White really want to make that move? So I'd probably stop Andrew Green at this point and I'd say, well, yes, that's a useful move, but were you happy about making it? Obviously, some weaknesses could be created on the king side when you make that move. You've got to think ahead when you make pawn moves. You can't just make pawn moves willy-nilly. They have consequences later on in the game. If he'd said to me, yes, I was happy making it because I was going to follow up with a knight development at e2, then I was going to bring my knight around to attack the bishop, I would say, great. You're playing with a plan. You're trying to hunt down this bishop on f5, and, well, you're playing aggressively as well, putting pressure on the opponent. So far, so good for White. I mean, I don't see there's anything wrong with what he's doing. Bishop comes back to g6. And now pawn up to h4. Well, now, I'm sure Green was happy making this move, but I would have said that if it had been me, alarm bells would have started to ring in my head before I made that move. You see, White is weakening his king side, and in particular that knight on g3 is unprotected. So this could give Black tactical opportunities. Now, it may be that White is threatening h5 in certain positions, which is an awkward move for Black to meet. But he may not be threatening it yet, number one. And number two, Black has the move queen c7. which immediately tries to take advantage of the fact that the white king side is weakened and the white knight is unprotected on g3. So I would say h4 is a very optimistic move. You can do it, but you must do it in the full knowledge of the risk you're taking. And you see already white has some problems in this position. He's got some problems because of this lousy move f3. If he plays his knight to e4, then I think black could take that knight, take again, and then play a very awkward queen check. And now we see that this move f3 wasn't so great after all. Going back to the game, green played an awkward looking move, rook h3. Black played bishop d6, again hitting the knight. And now I'd start to think that perhaps white's whole opening idea was a little bit ambitious. That f3 was good, moving the knight to g3 was good, but perhaps h4 was not the right thing to do. Well, green brought his knight to the middle. Black was happy to take that off. And now he completed his development with knight bd7. White took the bishop and now played bishop g5. A truly awful move. Well, now I would want really a close analysis of why this blunder was made. Do you see why it's a blunder first of all? Black played queen b4 check. A fork. Winning the bishop on c4 for nothing. So I would really want to know why this move was played. Green seems to me to be a rather optimistic player. Did he really think that moving his bishop to g5 was going to worry the opponent? Probably he was thinking to himself, okay, the guy's going to cast on the queen side, and after that he's in an awkward pin. But really, did he give any thought to the fact that black might have some tactical ideas in this position? So I would say to green, look, you've got some talent, but you have a tendency to view your position a bit too optimistically. If we just go back to the critical positions in this game, and the first of these arose after bishop g6, probably in this position you should just have simply played a move like bishop b3 to protect this pawn on c2, to prepare the move queen e2, and after that to cast on the queen side. That would have been a good way, and once you've cast on the queen side you can start to think about pushing your king side pawns. And in the final position after queen takes d6, I would have said, look, you've got two bishops. Okay, your position on the king side is not ideal, and he is attacking this pawn on d4. Was it not now time for a modest move like c3, and only then can you go on to exploit perhaps your advantages in this position? So green is over optimistic and he tends to rush in certain positions. He should be a bit more patient. That's what I would have told green, and I would have hoped that would have been useful to him. So anyway, you're not Andrew Green. I mean, and I don't know the chap either, so I may be being very presumptuous, but that's my observation of this game. And hopefully you can go away and learn a lot from these observations. So the point is, of course, write out all your games and try to look them over with a stronger player if you can. That will really bring you on. My final tip on this first of 3 DVDs is, I think, a really, really important one, which is going to stand you in good stead throughout your entire chess career. You've got to overcome the fear of losing. I can't stress how important this is. Remember that all the greatest players in chess history have lost countless games. And because they were able to learn the right lessons from these losses, they went on to become better players. I've seen so many players get demoralised by simply losing games of chess. They give up at the wrong moment and their chess career ends before it even began. If you're afraid of losing, chess is the wrong game for you, because undoubtedly, well, any game in fact, because you can't avoid losses. You've just got to make sure that you learn from your losses. It really is as simple as that. And for some reason, this is like a mental block for a lot of people. They don't learn from their losses. So, if you can overcome the fear of losing, you make a giant step forward in your chess understanding. This will also free your game up a lot and enable you to play a lot more openly, and to maybe take a few risks when you would have taken risks, and to fight harder. So the tip is clear. Alright, now one grandmaster who certainly doesn't fear losing is the Danish grandmaster Johnny Hector. This guy is willing to embrace risk in his games. He's willing to play all manner of crazy openings, gambit openings especially, with black are his speciality, and he's willing to play them against the strongest players in the world. Such an approach can lead to disaster, as we're about to see here in a game he played in Denmark in 1992 against the world-class grandmaster Mikhail Gurevich. But it could also lead to many successes. It also means that Hector is enjoying chess, and that is the main thing. If you overcome your fear of losing, you also start to enjoy chess a lot more. A lot of players absolutely hate chess because they really don't like the feeling inside them when they lose a game. Okay, well again, it's a very unhealthy situation, that one. Try to steer around that problem. Well, Gurevich is known as a classical player, a man of great erudition, and a true connoisseur of chess. So to play in this unorthodox manner with black is very bold. But Hector does not want for courage. And the idea of Queen A5 is to prevent White for the time being from playing D4. White, steeped in the classical traditions of chess, decides to ignore this Queen excursion and just to develop his pieces. So he plays Bishop E2, and now Hector really lashes out with the move F5. I doubt that move can be good. But basically what Hector is trying to do is to destabilise Gurevich. He's trying to mess up his mind. Gurevich is used to normal, stable positions. Hector is trying to just get a weird position right from the outset and to mess up Gurevich's head. Well, what happens if the guy's head is not messed up? I mean, this is a world-class player we're talking about here. We're not talking about some guy from the local league who's going to be completely taken aback by your very strange opening. Gurevich says to himself, right, this can't be good. The guy's lashing out. He's only got his queen developed. If I play normally here, I'm going to be able to exploit this very strange opening. So Gurevich starts to now get a bit of payback by playing D3. He opens up lines for his pieces. And around here, black was probably starting to regret his very strange opening. He hasn't really destabilised white at all in any way. He plays a check. But again, that tends to speed up white's development. However, black's got to get his pieces out here, or his king is going to be just murdered in the centre without any chance of getting in the game whatsoever. So black's next task is absolutely clear. He's got to castle and get his king to safety. And that is the motivation behind the next few moves. Black's queen's attacked. She has to give a check in order to keep the game on the boil. Why should white exchange any pieces at all here? Gurevich quite correctly sacrifices a pawn in this position, and Hector understands that to take this pawn would be a very bad idea, so he plays knight f6. Basically, white is trying to turn the game on its head here, whereas black was trying to get a quick attack right from the outset. Now it's white who's sacrificing a pawn, and he's trying to give Hector a taste of his own medicine, to be honest. Well, black could have grabbed this pawn, but white calmly goes king f1. And I can't really see any escape for black in this position. He's only got his queen out. His king is still stuck in the middle. Yes, white has had to put his king on f1. But white is threatening all sorts of things. He's threatening knight takes h7. He might be threatening bishop takes h7. He might be threatening a move like rook bishop d4. That's an interesting move, because if black takes the bishop, we get bishop g6 check, and white wins the queen with discovered attack. He might be threatening rook c1. A horrible position for black. So black played knight f6. White castled. Black castled. Well, okay, at this stage black starts to breathe a sigh of relief. But he still hasn't solved all his problems, because white is massively ahead in development. And an advantage in development means that you can start the attack. So this is what white does. Knight c e4 threatens to exchange off a defender of the black king. And after knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, white's renewed the threat to h7. Hector plays boldly, h6. Bishop h7 check, driving the king into the corner. And now bishop c2. A really excellent move with the threat of queen to d3. A lethal battery which eyes h7. d5 was played by black, intending to answer queen d3. with bishop f5. Who knows, maybe black can survive that one. Instead, Gurevich comes in with queen h5. An extremely strong move, threatening knight f7 check, which is a fork of queen and king. Also threatening queen to g6, which is even more lethal, I think. And then queen to h7 mate. Bishop d6. A humorous interlude. If knight f7 now, black will take it and checkmate white on h2. This is not what the doctor ordered. So Gurevich takes a small time out to block the black attack, and black's still left with these pieces undeveloped on the queen side. He can't get rid of them. Queen f6 was answered by knight h7, and queen f3, a counter attack on the white queen, by queen h4. White's first threat in this position is knight takes rook. His second threat, perhaps even more dangerous to black, is bishop takes h6, completely demolishing the pawn cover around the king. Hector's optimism has led to a disastrous position. He rushes to get his pieces out on the queen side, but bishop takes h6 is just a crushing move, destroying the last defensive remnants of pawn cover around the king. King g8, what a horrible move to have to play. But of course, if he goes pawn takes bishop, queen takes pawn, king g8, getting out of the way, knight g5, wins all black's pieces. White's threatening the queen, he's also threatening queen h7 mate. Very clear cut. So going back to bishop takes h6, king g8 only move, knight g5, it really is completely hopeless. Bishop e7, bishop takes g7. And in this position, black had had enough of the pounding and decided to stop the clock. But Hector, well, okay, he got crushed in this game, but for every game he gets crushed, he wins 9 games. He wouldn't be a strong grandmaster if that weren't the case, but he probably learned the valuable lesson in this game that you can't just go lashing out against world-class players and get away with it. You've got to restrict your optimistic approach when you play against these great players. Nevertheless, the point is made, and that brings volume 1 of this series to a close. You will make a big step forward if you overcome the fear of losing. You'll enjoy chess a lot more too. And that is what it's all about. Thank you for watching. I've really enjoyed making this series for you, and I hope you can go away from it feeling that you've really learned something. Until we meet again, the very best of luck.